Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 18th, 2025 election shakeup episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, we will cover a couple of other topics as we pretend that anything else is anywhere near as important as Governor Kim Reynolds announcing she is not running for re-election next year. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton across the magic window here in the Bureau office. How you doing, Tom?
Hey, Erin.
Lead Des Moines Bureau Chief Maya Marchel office here. Hello, Maya.
Happy Friday, Erin.
Happy Friday to you. Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is back. Good to see you, Sarah.
Greetings, Erin.
And finally, we have Gazette columnist Todd Dorman. Greetings, Todd.
Greetings to you as well.
And good to see that. I see your sign in there. It's good to see you're still with us for the time being anyways.
Yep.
All right. Before we get to the big story, let's talk a little bit this week about open records, the city of Davenport, and some interesting legislation. I want to start first with a couple of stories written by our Sarah Watson. We would have talked about this last week, but Sarah couldn't make it at our record time, and it's the latest chapter in the never-ending saga that is the 2023 collapse of a downtown Davenport building. Sarah, you wrote a couple of stories that not only deal with the building collapse, but the state's open records law and in particular a State Department of Criminal Investigation report on the collapse. Tell us a little bit about that reporting.
Yeah, so pretty soon after the building collapsed in 2023, just within a few days, the city of Davenport requested the Division of Criminal Investigation to do an investigation if any criminal law had been violated in the collapse, and so they assigned a few investigators to that, and then a report was given to the Scott County attorney in mid-2024 about time. And so we since then have been requesting the report. We've been requesting from Scott County Attorney Kelly Cunningham, do you plan to bring criminal charges? And we learned earlier this year that she's not planning to bring criminal charges. And so then when we asked if the DCI report would be made public, since there wouldn't be any criminal charges brought, she said that she was going to go before the Iowa Public Information Board to request an opinion. And so it took a couple months, but she has now submitted that that request for an opinion. And so she included some affidavits from the owner of the collapsed building and the manager of the building that collapsed. In their argument, essentially, they're arguing that the report shouldn't be made public because of harassment that the building.
I'm sorry, Sarah. They being the county attorney's office.
Oh yes, sorry. The county attorney's office.
No, that's okay. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. The county attorney's office is arguing that the DCI report should not be made public because of harassment that the building owner and the manager and city officials have experienced post building collapse. So they included a few affidavits that said that people had been coming to these individuals' houses, and there was one paragraph in particular that the building owner claimed that somebody had come up behind him and made a noise like a gun clicking that wasn't loaded, and threatened him essentially. And so the Scott County Attorney's Office seems very concerned that harassment could escalate or continue if this report is made public. The Freedom of Information Council and other media outlets, members of the public, have argued, and we haven't submitted anything before the board, but Freedom of Information advocates say that the report, or at least a summary of the report or report with redactions, could be made public as has been in other cases. However, right now is before the Iowa Public Information Board to decide, and the Scott County Attorney's Office is citing some provisions in Iowa law that says that investigative materials can be kept should be kept confidential. So that's kind of where that's at right now. And the other story that I wrote, a member of the public who has been very, very public with criticisms of Davenport in the wake of the building collapse, managed to get us basically the first about 8 pages of the report that kind of summarized like who had been on the investigation, how DCI was called to the like who requested the investigation, which was the city of Davenport, and then kind of just the very basic facts of the case that everybody knows, that a building collapsed, that it was owned by Andrew Wolds, that it happened on May 28th, things of that nature. So there wasn't really a lot of new information, but just the fact that it was obtained by the public and published was noteworthy, considering that there's this appeal to the Iowa Public Information Board.
Yeah, and boy, that is fascinating to hear, Sarah, specifically the explanation, the argument the county attorney is making for why that report should not be made public, because, and it is a absolutely perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about with Maya here, because Maya, that argument sounds familiar, doesn't it, to what you heard about an amendment that was introduced this week. So up at the State House, lawmakers have been advancing legislation that also deals with the Davenport building collapse, sort of in a tangential way, and state open records and meetings laws. The background there is that there are some issues with the city not complying with government transparency. This is going back, not complying with government transparency laws, and thus the legislation, which adds some training requirements for local government officials, increases penalties for violating state open records and meetings laws. But this week, that bill had a very interesting amendment tacked onto it. And like I said, the argument for it sounds very similar to what Sarah just talked about. Maya, you covered that debate. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this legislation is very closely tied to what Sarah just laid out. It was introduced by Representative Gary Moore of Bettendorf. He introduced the legislation actually last year originally. It passed both chambers, but it ended up being vetoed by the governor because of an amendment that she didn't agree with. And so this year, it passed the House last month. And I spoke to Moore after, and he was saying, there's not going to be any funny business in the Senate. They're not going to add anything on. I've made that sure. We want to get this through. And so yesterday it came up it was debated by the Senate.
Yesterday being Thursday.
Yes, yesterday being Thursday. And there was an amendment tacked on by the bill's floor manager, who's also from Bettendorf, Representative Scott Webster. And basically it would exempt all security camera footage from the Iowa Capitol, as well as data from key card swipes into the building or any doors in the building, which he argued, kind of similar to what Sarah was saying in some of those arguments, that it's necessary for the safety of all the staff and lawmakers that work at the Capitol, because if the public has access to that data or that footage, they can track what times of day folks are coming in, their patterns, and it makes it easier for them to stalk them, harass them, and it's a big safety concern for them. So that was his argument. But on the other side of it, a lot of Democratic lawmakers, almost all of them voting against this bill just because of that. They agreed with the open records half, but because of the amendment, they didn't vote for it, with the exception of Senators Cindy Winkler and Senator Mike Zimmer, both from the Quad Cities area, which makes sense on their part because they're closely tied to this situation. But so Democratic Senator Janet Peterson of Des Moines said the amendment should have been vetted in subcommittee before being tacked on the floor. And she said it changes the standards of what is an open record and creates a lack of transparency at the Capitol. She brought up the example of what if there was a protest, what if there was a crime that happened at the Capitol and lawmakers or staff or really anyone at the Capitol were harmed. we would want access to that footage. And then Webster came back and said, well, if a crime is committed at the Iowa Capitol, the security camera footage would still be available to the public through a subpoena used in a court case that would have come out of the hypothetical crime. And then this is kind of back and forth, and then Senator Herman Kornbach of Ames kind of came back and said, well, the public not all members of the public would have access to it, just because they wouldn't have access to the subpoenas. Like an average citizen just doesn't have that type of access. So it was really interesting, and it passed. But I talked to Representative Moore after, just to see if he knew if this was coming and, his thoughts on its chances moving forward. And he kind of said, he'd worked with senators to par down that amendment. Originally, it was much broader. He said it was going to apply to not just security cameras at the Capitol, but other state security cameras. And so he worked with those senators to par it down. He said he's fine with it, and if there needs to be tweaks to it in the future, he's comfortable with that. But it's been passed through the House twice, passed through the Senate twice. He said, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's just get this passed. And then if we need to make tweaks, we can do that.
Yeah, that was fascinating. And look, the one thing I'll say is that that's an awful lot of bathwater in that amendment. Todd, let me ask you, because this is sort of getting into opine territory. And look, I'll full disclosure, I asked Senator Amy Sinclair, the Senate president. By the way, just to go back on something, Maya's, it's Senator Scott Webster. Maya demoted him there and called him Representative Scott Webster, and they get touchy about that. So I want to clarify that it's Senator Scott Webster. I asked Senate President Amy Sinclair about this after debate Thursday, amongst kind of some other topics, end of week kind of little discussion here. And I said to her, this is, I couched my question with, this is as close as you'll ever hear me presenting a question that sounds like me taking a side on the bill. And it may not surprise you that as a journalist, I tend to have strong feelings about government transparency laws. So Todd, let me put a similar question to you that I asked Senator Sinclair. Like, look, those concerns, I have no doubt we all have inboxes too. And I'm not saying what we hear is as bad as what the legislators hear, but we can imagine. And so I have no doubt that there's concerns about safety and security. But, at the expense of this just feels like such a huge carve out to that open records law to me, Todd, to say that Capitol footage is not subject. I mean, to the points that were brought up to being debated. If there's ever a protest, and if there's interactions with police that are questionable, and now that you can only get to that with a subpoena rather than an open records request. I mean, this seems like a big deal to me. What are your thoughts, Todd?
Well, what I thought of when I read about this was, it kind of made me laugh, because are they under the impression that it's difficult to track a lawmaker in the state capitol? I mean, breakfast time, you go down and see if they're eating a bunch of bacon. I mean, then you go up to the chamber, stand around by the coffee pot, they'll probably come. It's the probably, they'll be in the lobbyist area.
Then they're in caucus for 3 hours.
Yeah, most of them don't have offices, so it's
Right.
pretty easy. And staff, if you know what office they work in, you can walk right up there and say hello, and hopefully not anything more than that. But yeah, it's a weird pretext, and it makes you kind of wonder what the real reason is that they don't want the footage to be released, because there's usually, something more beyond. I mean, you can argue security for every closed meeting, or
Right.
record. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
it's always safety. It's the safety of public officials. Well,
A city council could say that too, right, Todd? And say, well, we need to
Yeah.
go into closed session to talk about more things because
yeah.
we're worried about the safety. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's a bad idea, as you said, with protests and things. If something happens, we're going to want to see what happened, and that may be the only way to see it. But
I feel it merits pointing out, and I'll do it again. Sorry for interrupting again, Todd. But
Nope.
the argument that, well, you can just still get it, but through a subpoena. I mean, getting something through a court subpoena versus an open records request is not even remotely the same thing.
No, you need to have a lawyer who will inevitably charge you by the hour.
And there's no guarantee the court will grant it.
Well, no, and then you argue for the subpoena, and then there's a period of time before they rule. Hopefully, not long. The thing that will be interesting is the Public Information Board has been time and time again a real disappointment, considering how it was sold when the legislation was passed many years ago. And it will not surprise me a bit if they rule that they don't have to produce the investigation report, which again, it's you sort of, at some point you sort of wonder what's the point of having an Iowa public what's it called, the Iowa
Public Information
Board.
Yep.
When it's it's going to just keep information from the public. It seems like maybe we don't need it.
Yeah. To Todd's point, for those who aren't familiar with the history, it's not that old a board. It was created, what, about 20 years ago, Todd, roughly. Open government advocates have argued pretty consistently from the start that the board has almost always, if not always, erred on the side of government in any kind of significant open records and meetings, conflicts, and that it has rarely to never erred on or sided with the side of government transparency, that sort of thing. So that's what Todd's talking about there. And then, that will be interesting to see how that board handles that request from Davenport, and whether I'll be interested to see what happens to this public records bill now too. Like Maya said, it got vetoed last year, which is a pretty rare thing, by the way, for Governor Reynolds. She is, largely because of the Republican trifecta, right? She's hardly ever had to use her. She's very sparingly used her veto pin in her 8 or 9 years as governor here, and that was one of them last year because of that amendment. And we'll see, does the Public Information Board and/or the Freedom of Information Council talk to the governor about this one, and does that one get vetoed again? I know, as Maya pointed out, Gary Moore is hoping not, and so maybe from that standpoint, maybe he pitches the governor and she signs it, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to that now.
Well, one question I have about it, which I haven't read the bill, who will have access to that footage? Will lawmakers have access? I don't know, because if every lawmaker is going to be able to view that footage and the public's not, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So,
yeah, that's a good question. I didn't ask that yesterday. That's a good question. That's worth asking.
And I would just really quick clarify that that it was Scott County that made the request to the Iowa Public Information Board, not Davenport.
Thank you. Not the city.
No.
Scott County, not the city. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So fascinating stuff and worthy of inclusion in a podcast discussion when there was even bigger news to talk about. And let's get to that now. 1 week ago today, if you ever needed any proof that the governor's office doesn't worry about our On Iowa Politics podcast schedule, she announced shortly after we recorded last week. And so this story is a week old now. But as we record here on Friday morning, almost exactly 1 week ago today, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds surprised, from what I can tell, the entirety of the Iowa political sphere when she announced that she will not seek re-election in 2026. Just how surprised were we in the State House press corps? Tom, why don't you tell our listeners what you did last Friday morning when we were told that the Reynolds campaign was about to make an announcement later that day? What did you do at that point, Tom?
Yeah, so when we got the heads up from the governor's campaign that they would be making a announcement Friday morning, myself and many reporters in the Iowa Capitol Press Corps assumed it meant that the governor was going to announce she's running for a third term, because she, essentially all but hinted at that during a press conference back in either February or March.
February. Yep.
February. Thank you. Where, she was asked about former one-term state lawmakers, former state representative Brad Sherman, Republican from Williamsburg, businessman and pastor, who earlier in February, had announced his plans to seek the Republican nomination for governor. And so she was asked to weigh in on that and the prospects of potentially having a primary challenger. And in responding to reporters' questions, said that I am running on my record. And so, when we heard that led us to believe that, okay, she is going to run for re-election. And, there was a follow-up question from a reporter saying, okay, so you are running for re-election. And then she walked that back and said, well, stay tuned. So all of the indications, at least at that time, were, again, that she was going to run for re-election. So myself and other reporters pre-wrote a story based on that assumption. And then, surprise, she came out with the announcement that she is not going to run for re-election in 2026. She will not seek a third term. I went to the Iowa prayer breakfast on Thursday morning, and the governor, in her address to those gathered, talked a little bit about this. She mentioned nearly 2 years ago when her husband, Kevin, was diagnosed with lung cancer, and said that she and her family prayed boldly without ceasing that he would be healed. And saying that, again, today, God lifts our family up in prayer, and talks about how she spent a whole lot of time in prayer contemplating a very significant decision, and that was whether or not she should run for a third term, and said that it was an internal battle, and sometimes those can be the most challenging to overcome. And so, again, as you mentioned, it caught everybody by surprise, including lawmakers, including those who say that they are either considering now running for governor or have not ruled it out. They said that they were shocked and essentially didn't see this coming. And so, now they're kind of reevaluating things now that the political landscape in Iowa heading into the 2026 midterm elections has been shaken up.
Yeah, and just to drive this home real quick before I move on to Todd here, Tom, because I have been asked this question a lot. How did you know? How were you surprised? I know you have too, Tom. We've been talking to people at the Capitol all week, like you said, lawmakers, lobbyists, staff, covering the gamut. Have you heard from any one single person, and I'm not asking for a name, but have you even heard from one person, Tom, who said, yeah, I thought that might happen?
Not a one.
Yeah, me either. It's unbelievable. The one thing I will say about this administration is they clearly are capable of keeping things close to the vest and in-house, because I haven't found a person yet who wasn't surprised by this.
Well, and again, looking at the governor's remarks, looking at the video that she posted on social media, and then again, remarks that she's made afterward, including what she had to say at the Iowa prayer breakfast. And she also spoke to some reporters the day after on Saturday at the governor's mansion at Terrace Hill for the Easter egg hunt or egg roll that the Easter event that they have there at Terrace Hill, said that essentially, this was an internal conversation, an internal debate. It seems like it was very much kind of a family decision, a family conversation about what the best path forward would be, again, for her husband, and the rest of her family.
All right, Todd, how about you? Are you the only one in Iowa who wasn't surprised by this?
Well, this is news to me. I hadn't heard anything about this until the podcast this morning. Wow, it's pretty amazing. I didn't see that coming.
They must have taken you off the press release email list.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. They removed all traces of my existence. Well, first of all, I hope that she's not. I hope this decision isn't because her husband is
right.
Her husband's illness has somehow worsened,
right,
or anything like that. I mean, we play. We talk about politics, but we're all human beings, most of us anyway, and so I hope that's not the reason.
Yeah, that's a good point, Todd. And I'm sorry, really quick. I said this to someone else. With that kind of stuff, every update that we've heard from the governor periodically has been mostly positive and encouraging. But as we all know, because we all have been touched by this with cancer, that unfortunately that news can change on a moment's notice. So that's a really good point. And obviously, we all hope that that's not the case.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in here and say, her husband Kevin was at the Iowa prayer breakfast. He also spoke, gave brief remarks. He was also at that Easter event at the governor's mansion at Terrace Hill, and so we've seen him out and about with the governor. He was also with her at the Iowa Ag Leaders dinner. Either earlier this month or maybe it was last month. Anyway, so he is out and about. They're doing events together. He seems to be doing well. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. As far as surprise, I was surprised. I think everyone was, as you said. Although it's weird, there was a period of time after she was reelected for several months where the conventional wisdom was she's not going to run. She's done everything she wanted to, and she's not going to run. But then you mentioned the gaggle in February where she hinted in a way that made it sound like she was going to run. And then that became the conventional wisdom. And then she ended up not running again. What this means is we're going to have we've only had 4 elections in the past nearly 60 years with an open governor's seat.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Ray won in 68, Terry Branstad in 82, Tom Vilsack in 98, and what's the other one? Oh, Chet Culver, 2006. Yeah, that's right. So, and it's I understand why she's not going to run. I think because she has accomplished a lot of what she has wanted to accomplish, to my chagrin, but she has. And but what's the Republicans are going to have to? I mean, they're probably confident, but the Democrats have had 2 bad experiences. Basically, when Tom Vilsack left to try to run for president of the United States for some reason, Chet was elected, but then Branstad beat him after a bad 4-year term, and then we know how that all turned out. And Tom Harkin decided to quit, and they were pretty confident that Bruce Braley was going to win that seat, but no. And now, they're on the outs. So, it's sometimes when a well-known incumbent quits, it's difficult to fill that gap, and the governor's praying, and Brenna Bird is now praying, and I'll let Tom explain why Brenna Bird is praying these days.
Yeah, so that's the inevitable discussion that we have to have now. So who's going to run? We'll start with Republicans because that's the new news here. We've been talking about what might happen on the Democratic side, and we could touch base on that real quick. But obviously, what's more relevant in this immediate moment is what Republicans are going to throw their hat into the ring, and because we're shackled to the Golden Dome these days at the legislative session, that's where most of our questions have been asked and answered thus far, with some exceptions. But Tom, tell us who all you've been able to learn is, as you alluded to earlier, either thinking about it or hasn't completely ruled it out.
Yeah, so 3 Republican state lawmakers and Iowa's Republican Secretary of Agriculture have said either they are considering or at least have not ruled out running for governor after Governor Reynolds last week announced she will not seek re-election. It's expected that it's going to be a large GOP primary field because, as we've said, this is the first time an incumbent will not appear on the ballot in the race for governor since 2006, and only the 3rd time since 1982. So there's a lot of pent-up demand, right? There's a lot of Republicans who have been eyeing running for governor and have been thinking about doing this for a while. And so now, a lot of them are evaluating, whether or not this is going to be their opportunity. So House Speaker Pat Grassley, State Representative Bobby Kaufman, State Senator Michael Buslow, and Agriculture Secretary Mike Naig have all said that either they are, again, actively considering or at least have not ruled out running for governor. Grassley, in a statement, praised Governor Reynolds as a bold leader who he said put parents back in the driver's seat, passed historic tax cuts, and kept common sense on social issues, and then asked about his political future. Speaker Grassley said that he's not ruling anything out. Secretary Naig, in a statement, said he and his family are, quote, thoughtfully discussing, end quote, the possibility of him running for governor. He said that right now he's focused on his job as Secretary of Agriculture and supporting Iowa farmers, growing the state's economy and protecting soil and water, but said that he is having conversations with friends and supporters across the state to determine whether there's a clear path forward. Representative Kaufman, a Republican from Wilton, who chairs the House Tax Policy Ways and Means Committee, said that he is considering running for governor. Kaufman is the son of Republican Party of Iowa Chair Jeff Kaufman. He also worked on Trump's campaign in Iowa as a senior advisor ahead of the 2024 Iowa GOP caucuses. Again, said he is considering running for governor. He's weighing what running would mean, both for his farm, for his business, for his legislative seat, and whether, quote, he wants to go from a citizen legislator to a full-time job on steroids. He also said that he would not run if Pat Grassley does. He called the House Speaker his best friend at the Capitol, and said that should Speaker Grassley become a serious candidate, that he would not be running and would be endorsing the grandson of longtime Iowa U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley. Senator Buslow said that he's always going to look for ways to serve Iowa, so didn't, again, rule out potentially making a run for governor. And then, as I mentioned, as of now, former one-time Republican state lawmaker Brad Sherman, pastor from Williamsburg, is the only declared Republican candidate for governor. Again, Sherman announced plans back in February to run again before Reynolds' announcement. Iowa Republican Attorney General Brenna Bird hinted in a statement last week that she would be considering running for governor in 2026. In the statement, she said that she and her husband are, praying about what Reynolds' decision may mean for their future. Other Republicans who have been discussed as possible candidates include all 4 members of Iowa's U.S. House delegation, so Representative Ashley Hinson, Zach Nunn, and Randy Feenstra, as well as U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matt Whitaker. Feenstra's campaign in a statement said that he is focused on serving Iowans in Congress and delivering on President Trump's agenda. Ashley Hinson's campaign sent out a similar statement saying that her focus is on trying to retain and hold on to the House Republican majority and working to elect a conservative governor who will build upon Governor Reynolds' conservative accomplishments and policy wins, and a conservative governor that will work to continue to further President Trump's agenda. U.S. Representative Marionette Miller Meeks said that she will not or is not exploring a run for governor. Again, similar to statements that we've heard from Representative Feenstra and Hinson, that she's focused on serving people of Iowa's 1st congressional district, working to reauthorize the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, lowering prescription drugs prices, protecting Iowa farmland from the Chinese Communist Party, and protecting women's sports. On the Democratic side, Paul Dahl, from Webster City, who has previously ran unsuccessfully for governor in Congress, announced his candidacy for governor back in November. State Auditor Rob Sand is a potential Democratic candidate for governor, but he has not yet announced his intentions for 2026. He raised more than $8 million last year, although $7 million of that came from his family. And he finished the year with, I think, about $7.5 million in his campaign account. So, I mean, he has a large campaign war chest that he is built up that would, put him in a better position than most Democrats in the state should he decide to throw his hat in the ring.
All right, so there you go, Todd. You've heard the list. Who's your early front runner in that Republican primary?
At this moment, I think Brenna Bird's going to run, and I think she will be the Republican front runner, and it's her nomination to lose. I mean, lawmakers, Governor Tom Vilsack's the exception, but running out of the legislature for the governor's office is, you're world famous in the Capitol, but outside of the Capitol, you may not know, people may not know who you are. I mean, the Sherman machine is formidable, but I don't think he's going to win the nomination. But
No.
it'll probably be an interesting primary, if you do get multiple candidates in. But I think Bird possesses the quality that Republicans want most in an elected official, and that's that she makes liberals mad. So otherwise, I mean, that's the best part, and then from there, it'll take care of itself. But her approval rating in the Register was that a Register poll, I think, or was it someone else's?
Probably, I know Register does that. I don't know.
Yeah, had her at the low. She had the lowest approval rating of all the statewide elected officials. Sand had the highest. and I think Sand's gonna run. I would be surprised if he doesn't, and with the money he's got.
Right.
But both parties would benefit from a primary. I think the Democrats in particular, because they need some attention on their agenda, and I think that would do it.
Yeah.
And this isn't the longest they've gone without a governor. They went from 1969 to 1999 with all Republican governors, 30 years. And
Bob Ray and Terry Branstad.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And Tom Vilsack used the slogan that it's time to rotate the crops, which resonated. I think that was something that people, thought was correct. The Republicans had it not long enough, but very different political atmosphere now. So I don't know if that's if that'll work.
Yeah, we're going to be able to talk about this election so much in the coming weeks and months now. One thing I want to ask you, so let's go back first to Reynolds, Todd, and Sarah and Maya, forgive me, jump in on any of this here if you want to at any moment. But Todd, I want to ask you something that occurs to me because I've done a couple of radio hits this week as in the wake of this news breaking, and I've been asked this both times. There was when the governor made her announcement that she was not seeking re-election, there were some folks who developed a theory that she recently got scared off by a primary challenge or worried that she wouldn't be able to win a primary if whoever it was. And I didn't hear a specific name to that challenge. I have a hard time imagining Brenna Bird was going to jump in and primary Governor Reynolds, so I don't know who they thought would, or maybe that she didn't think she would win the general election next year. I have my opinion on this, Todd, but do you think there's anything to that possibility that Governor Reynolds decided not to run for re-election because she was worried about losing either the primary or the general election?
I don't think so. I mean, you look at her record, her Republican bona fides are pretty clear. And her allegiance to Trump now is pretty clear. So, yeah, I don't see where the room would be to run on her right because she's already very conservative.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and that's what I said when I was asked. And just knowing, and this isn't based on any inside intel, but just knowing Governor Reynolds from having covered her all these years. She's very confident in herself, in the agenda that she and her state house Republicans and her administration have set forth. I have a really hard time believing that she would be scared off by whatever someone might think about a primary or even a tough general election fight. That would match with the Kim Reynolds that I've from covering her since 2017 and beyond.
Yeah, that's true.
I wonder if part of that, I remember, I think it was either the day before or the morning of, I think it might have been the day before, there was like a morning consult poll that came out that showed Governor Kim Reynolds was the only governor that had a underwater approval rating. But, like Todd said, she has all these, bona fides that it is, I think, hard to imagine that she'd be scared off by, something like that. And obviously the poll, comes out the day before. Like they've probably been planning this announcement for a lot longer than, 24 hours.
Right. They didn't. Yeah, she didn't make that decision the night before. And to that point, that's a good point. Thank you for reminding me about that, Sarah. That very well may have been what fed some of those theories. And also to that specifically, she's been underwater in that morning consult poll for years now.
Right. It was the fifth straight quarter of morning consult saying that she's the nation's most unpopular governor. So, right. It's been a couple of years now. But then you look at her election victories and the margins there, especially her most recent re-election victory. And you look at how far the state has shifted to the right. And I mean, it seems like the Iowa electorate writ large is pretty comfortable with her policies and her agenda.
Yep. All right, man, it's going to be interesting. I felt like 2026 was already creeping up on us a little bit with some House and Senate candidates on the fringes kind of starting to talk. And now this bomb drops us on us. And we're in it now, man. It's midterm season, whether we want it to be or not. So here we go. Buckle up. At the very least, we'll have plenty to talk about on future episodes of On Iowa Politics. That's going to do it for this one. Thanks, folks, for sticking around. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. And you can also find the podcasts each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now that you listen to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And get to those pages. By the way, we had stuff that I would have loved to have talked about this week, but obviously big news that we didn't have time to get to. So make sure you're reading all about it at the Lee and Gazette websites. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today, speaking of which, can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Maya Marchel Hoff, Sarah Watson, Todd Dorman, and our guest producer, Becky Gardner, I'm Erin Murphy.